Welcome back, everyone. And this is going to be the final video that is exploring the Churchill reading. It has been a long series, longer than I intended, but I hope useful for you and something that has been worthwhile in terms of supporting your engagement of this very dense and idea-rich text. And as I've mentioned previously in this series, a resource that you will hopefully return to more than once, whether it's engaging with the videos or reading the text on your own and going through it and making your own notes and ideas and see how these perspectives connect with the other material that's presented throughout this unit. So I think it's once again an important foundation stone to begin with as you move forward in the whole unit, as we are introduced to the various aspects in the other topics. Some of the more, I guess, pragmatic topics in terms of those, say, focusing on skills. It's an interesting way to approach some of those technical skills, say when we look at communication, how we consider teacher communication in light of some of these critical perspectives. So I just wanted to add some final concluding thoughts here and highlight a couple of issues in the last few pages of the chapter. So this section here, Teachers' Work, Lives and Identities, just a bit of a summary of what's been presented throughout the chapter and about some of the features that characterize the teaching profession, that they've taken a historical perspective, how these things have developed and the influence they continue to have in shaping what we term as the teaching profession, how we organize that, how we classify it and characterize it. So some important points here to just get your head around, particularly around the fact that where they state the centrality of pre-service teacher education to teachers' knowledge base and the standing of the profession. Now, you are currently immersed in this very point that teachers don't become teachers until they progress through a particular course and are deemed to be competent per the standards and requirements of that course, whether they be particular theories that pre-service teachers must engage with. I've already talked about learning psychology as a central tenet of all pre-service teacher education courses, certainly in our country, but across the world. There is also a certain requirement around professional practice, meaning how many days that you engage in on-site school learning. And there is a requirement of all university courses to have a minimum amount of professional experience days. In fact, in the Masters of Teaching, you get more than the minimum requirement. But again, this shows you the sorts of, the gatekeepers or how universities act as gatekeepers now. They didn't in the past, but they certainly do now. They act as those important gatekeepers who allow individuals to pass through the requirements of what it means to be a teacher, and they're the ones that provide that rubber stamp, along with obviously schools and on school sites where there will be mentors and so forth that will also pass students, but the university are the ones that organize that provide that important jumping off point. So you are products of this very point here. The strength of teacher organizations, and they're focused on industrial issues. Once again, we've talked briefly about unions, but they do continue to play a very important role in the teaching profession, how it's defined, how particular minimum requirements in terms of how much teacher dot time, what we call dot time, which is duties other than teaching. That's one example of how unions play a very significant role in defining how much time other than core teaching teachers must have on their timetable every week. So that's one issue that the unions often have action around as well. Pay is another big one. Certainly in the public school sector, the unions have a very large part to play. This point here, which I'll move on to momentarily and elaborate a little bit more on it in a second, but this idea that teaching is a vocation, not just a job. So that continues to thread itself through what it means to be a teacher, why people enter into the teaching profession, and at times why they leave. That sometimes the pragmatic demands of the job, be they bureaucratic and so forth, when they overwhelm the sense of vocation, the sense of making a difference, that can sometimes cause people to the attrition rate in terms of wanting to leave. The start point, the sheer challenge of daily classroom teaching. People have been making note already on certainly the Facebook page and communicating this notion of feeling a little bit scared or overwhelmed by that sense of challenge to daily classroom life, what it means to actually walk into a classroom and to settle, control, manage a potentially unruly group of teenagers and to manage all the various aspects of that, the learning and the particular challenges that poses. So, that is continues to be, and in some schools more than others, but there is an innumerable amount of challenges that teachers face, and overcoming those challenges can be exhausting. And as well, the changes that have occurred in more recent years, particularly the emergence of new standards, professional standards and frameworks that define what it means to be a teacher, what it means to be a teacher leader, and how then teachers are performance managed around those standards and frameworks. So that's been since the mid-90s that have started to evolve, but more so in the last 5 years, they've become part and parcel of the standard practice that's occurring in universities and in schools. And this sense that there has been a gradual reassertion of control over teachers by governments, that there was a looseness that occurred in the 70s and the 1980s, and after that looseness there has been a gradual winding back to a tighter control of teachers, what they do, what they teach, and what occurs in classrooms. And you'll see a lot of the rhetoric coming from government is having a sense that we need more control. Having, say, even parental control is also a large portion of how schools can improve. So the more information that parents are equipped with about their students, about the comparisons between their students in the schools and like schools, say accessing the My School website, the NAPLAN data, etc. If parents have choice and control, they can then have a part to play in what's going on in their students' lives in the classroom and engage with the school. And that's where that's the line the rhetoric's taking at the moment. And the idea that there's self-regulation, so you have the teacher registration board, for example, and stakeholder groups as well that play a part in the teaching profession, and what goes on in schools is increasing now. So if we just go down to this section as well, that I just wanted to highlight this notion of sense of professionalism. I mentioned it previously, I've mentioned it in other videos, about there is this mission to the teaching profession that doesn't necessarily exist in other like professions, or certainly not in the same ways. And there has been mention once again on the Facebook page and following the conversations around, about, say, teacher attrition and its relationship to the current generation of workers. And there are a shifting labour force now, maybe more so than there ever has been in history. But what I feel, maybe doctors might enter their profession with wanting to help people, maybe social workers, etc. But I think there is a particular constellation that defines the sense of vocation around teaching, and then how the community sees what teachers do, that is quite unique in other professions, and potentially has a large part to play in why some people walk away and we have this quite high attrition rate. This idea that many people enter the profession very optimistic, maybe in a naive way about the difference that they can make in the lives of young people, and very quickly they become quite pessimistic as to the difference they can make. Now, this doesn't mean that teachers don't make a difference, and importantly, if you've been following along on the Facebook page, you'll see, and I highly recommend you watch the current episode of Insight that is available through, you can watch SBS On Demand online, or the short clips there, you'll get a sense of it, about the difference, the real difference teachers do make, and how you, and again, linking to this idea of being both an optimist and a realist, you must continue to maintain a sense of optimism that you can make a real difference in kids' lives. It may not necessarily be those massive seismic differences that the Insight episode sort of illuminates for us as a community, but it nonetheless, you can make small incremental differences that you will then pass on, say, to the next teacher in the lives of the young people that you engage with. So you can make a little bit of difference in terms of their skills, their development, and then the next teacher will, in a sense, you're passing the baton along. So, it's those kinds of smaller differences that maybe aren't so recognized, that aren't so seismic and life-changing, but nonetheless very important in how young people come to see themselves and how they come to engage with their particular trajectories and finding their place in the social fabric. So yes, and there are certainly challenges about conforming to these reproducing existing norms and practices. How do we break free from them? That is quite difficult. How do we transform schools? Yes, these are big, important challenges that you will be facing. But hopefully you're coming into it again with a sense of optimism that change is possible, that we can make schools better. It may be slow and incremental, but it is possible. And as well that this whole sense of these professional codes and requirements, legislative, etc., how teachers are viewed by the media, all the sources of advice that are available, websites, etc., that make the saturation of information around what it means to work as a teacher, how do we work effectively and competently and professionally, and having to pass through that and find your own way through is important. And I think it's just that continual engagement, and I believe having a rich theoretical critical view of what's going on can improve practice a great deal and make each of you highly competent educators as you move forward in your career. And it will take a while. It's not instantaneous. It doesn't just happen immediately. It takes much engagement. It takes much front-facing in terms of working with young people every day of your professional life over years before you really embed this stuff. And that's okay. It's okay not to be amazing straight out of the gate. You will develop repertoires of skills, knowledges, experiences, perspectives as you move through in your career. But just quickly as well, just as another point here that I just want to highlight, and something that gets forgotten or lost in terms of how we think about what teachers do, and I think this chapter does build this argument throughout, that it's not just shaping the minds of teachers, certainly from my perspective as we think about what teachers do, it's not just about engaging your intellect, and it's important to think about the materiality, the material nature of what teachers do in terms of how we engage ourselves, our bodies, the human interactions we have between bodies, the ways you teach, the actions you take of the flow on, I guess, of the mind, the intellect, and theory and knowledge, and how that then shapes what we actually do when we occupy a classroom space and we mobilize particular technologies, and what our children's bodies are doing and how they are being mobilized in certain ways. and how this conforms or doesn't conform to some normalized understandings of what teachers do, what teachers look like, how they should act, perhaps breaking free of some of those normalized practices, and do different things, get kids to do different things with their minds and their bodies, to re-engage learning in the space, in the moment. And it's not just about what the NAPLAN test seems to be so focused on, is that intellectual engagement, and they sort of forget about the material nature of learning and how critical, even in teenagers, the body and the shaping of our bodies in terms of learning, and that in the moment experience of learning and how it comes alive. It's emotive. It's shaped through space, just as much as it's shaped through the transformation of the mind, of the intellect, of the will, and it is highly emotive at the same time. So again, I just hope that these videos have been useful for you. I do appreciate any feedback that you may have to improve these. Hopefully I haven't been too rambling. I do tend to shape these videos, not off the cuff, but I talk with what I know, with what I'm researching, with what I've experienced, and I hope that they've been focused enough to prove useful for you. And if so, please feedback, please let me know that they are making a difference in your learning, and that I'm on the right track, so the future videos that I create can be of most use to you in your progress throughout the unit. But thank you for engaging all the way through this series for topic 1. As I said, it's been a big one, but hopefully one that will provide that really important foundation as you move through the rest of the learning. So thank you.